You're at home. We have a lot of people, an audience at home. Tonight's program includes experts in the solar field, including none other than our very own board member, James Worden, who is the vision behind our net zero and solar projects here at the Stevens Center. Did you know that this theatre is powered by the sun? Our programs in this theatre include climate justice, local and regional history, and cultural themes. All events at the Worden Theatre are open to the public, so go to the North Andover Historical Society website to find out more about our other programs coming up, and you can register for them right there. Even better, if you're not a member, join the Historical Society and become a member and find out more on a regular basis when we send you our e-newsletters. This event is being put on at no charge, so don't forget to leave a donation in the box at the entrance when you leave. Refreshments, very generously sponsored by Ace Solar, will be available in the lobby afterwards. We've got pizza from Taki's Pizza. Please note, no food or drinks are permitted in the theatre itself. The theatre and the Stevens Center Museum here on Mass Ave are available for private gatherings, movie screenings, family reunions, and other great events where you can gather with your friends and family. Our three speakers this evening are James Worden from Worden Marine, Joyce Lee from IndigoJLD Health, and Casey Baldock from Ace Solar. Our educator, David, who you already met, will be moderating the speaker program as well as the questions and answers following the program. Feel free to come up with some great questions and we'll challenge these speakers to answer them for you. We will also have remote viewers zooming in with their questions so we can answer them too. Got to keep our speakers on their toes. Many thanks to the speakers and for Ace Solar for sponsoring our refreshments this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna. Can you all hear me? Yes? Is the mic on?
Should be. Yeah.
Can you? Yeah. Is the microphone on? Yours is working. Yours is working. Okay, great. Well, so nice to see all of you here. I am Joyce Lee, head of IndigoJLD Green Health, and it is a practice devoted to sustainability and wellness. I came to work with this wonderful group of people at the Historical Society through Net Zero certification. In 2022, I had the pleasure of working with James Worden in making this Net Zero certification through a third party, where 30,000 kilowatt hour was produced by the photovoltaics, and the building only consumed over 20,000 kilowatt hour a year. And even after the cafe was put in place, in all of 2023, you can see that it still produced over 30,000 kilowatt hour, and it is still consuming less through this building, and hence second year in a row. So big congratulations. I think through this third-party certification, we have an opportunity to understand metrics and the evidence-based solar energy production even more. And then we also had a meeting earlier on at the beginning of the grant program and met the Pulios at one of our meetings, and they are from New Hampshire, and talk about Native communities and land acknowledgement. I also met with NAICOB in Boston, which in 1969, they were established as the Boston Indian Council. And here are the tribes in New England. If any of you in the audience are live streaming, have Native American roots, we would like to talk to you more about solar afterwards. And learning from these meetings, we are honoring the indigenous communities from all over Massachusetts, whether you're federally or state recognized. We believe that solar should be accessible to everyone, and definitely even more so to the Native communities who could be more remote. And because of this grant that we received, we are making a special effort to reach out to tribes that may not be in person in the auditorium tonight. So please send your questions to David through the Zoom Q&A, and we are happy to help you whatever you can, and hopefully schedule a future visit to the Historical Society. And as the Historical Society is based in New England, I am so pleased that the board and the staff had approved this land acknowledgement earlier this winter. And along with this text, the history tab of the Society's website had included much more information on Native Americans and the history before the European settlers arrived. And current scholarship understands that at least 4 indigenous tribes and nations that use the land in North Andover. What are they? Pawtucket, Massachusetts, Pennacook, and Wabanaki. And the place of swift waters was the name that the Native communities gave to the Merrimack River and Valley. It was the Pennacook people who gave the name of Ware Hill because they used to find this a very fertile hunting and fishing area. We also visited Rolling Ridge a few months ago because we learned of their land dedication. So all of this land acknowledgement and more research into the past involves additional proactive programming and education led by the Society. So it is very proactive and action-driven. Well, in fact, solar and Native lifestyle are intertwined. There, when we had no electricity for light and fossil fuel for heating, they have very little to work with. And as an architect, I always marvel at the resources that they work with, and they were able to make places that last forever, and beautiful places too. This is a good example from southwestern Colorado. The Mesa Verde dwellings, they highlight the south-facing cliff dwellings that were formerly inhabited by the Anasazi culture. And orientation matters, where this is the high summer sun with the south-facing rooms, where this cliff palace, which is the largest of the cliff dwelling in Mesa Verde, shows how the rock overhang provides the summer shading at high noon in the summer, and the rock walls in the back really shield the Native peoples from the cold winter and towards the north. So ancient cultures really understood solar principles. And from a distance, the south-facing structure demonstrates that the principle of passive solar, as you can see here, the workmanship of the cliff palace have features of more than 200 rooms that you can see here. Some of them are of great quality, earthen walls, some with even plaster inside. But it is these earthen walls that modulate the temperature in the summer and the winter. And closer to home, the same passive solar technique was still very much in the builder's mind in North Andover, in your historic houses here. Barnard House, for example. On the left, you can see a Google map of the siting of the building, a south-facing garden to the front, and then the backyard is shielded by trees from the wind, when New England winters were even colder. And the row of windows on the south are welcoming, stately, and elegant, but it is not just for aesthetic purposes. They serve an important solar purpose, taking in the winter sun, like the cliff dwellings that we just saw. Here, it is further evidence that the builders really knew what they were doing. If you look at, try to see if you can see, the roof shape over here, how close it is to the roof shape here, which is in an ideal situation. So was it wisdom or was it magic? June 21st, summer solstice. The sun is high, and therefore the roof could shade the intense sun rays. You can see on the right here. The windows in front of the houses where it takes in the summer sun, and then the side windows that you see on the right, they are facing west, so they are smaller, so to avoid the intense glare in the late afternoon. The sun is high in the summer and low in the winter. Winter solstice December 21st, the shortest day of the year, and that's when you need most of the sun taken in. So rule number 1, make the building as efficient as possible before deploying solar technology, and the Stevens Center has done just that. It has insulation put in to the historic 1960s building, and it is R28, so you can do that for your home and your business as well. What is the take-home here with solar design and passive solar design? Utilized by ancient people and our forefathers, you want to use the shading to keep your house cool or your building cool in the summer, and the big windows to the south, the solar orientation, as well as the shading to keep the house cool in the summertime. So without good solar orientation, what do? We just crank up our HVAC to stay comfortable, right? And speaking of cranking up the HVAC, the Industrial Revolution ushered in a massive opportunity to do just that, keeping our house warm in the winter, staying comfortable. But little did we know the health impacts in the 18th and 19th century of coal then. But boy, do we know that now. So while coal was dirty 200 years ago, we did not have that multiple cars in the garage. We don't have all the electronic gadgets. We don't have 24/7 medical equipment or server farms. And plus, the population was much smaller then, so the impact was less. But over time, our appetite for fossil fuel energy grew, and the climate impact just again, it was even larger. So in 2015, the world community came together and agreed in the Paris Agreement that we cannot go over 1.5 degrees Celsius. But is that in sight today? We are still not reaching that. And as a result, we are seeing more and more extreme weather, both locally and abroad. So when you think about it, the consumption of you plugging in your phone and using your computer, using conventional energy, you are in fact emitting carbon and greenhouse gas into the atmosphere every single time. That is if you are not using 100% renewable. Here, so from dirty to clean, solar energy is one of the cleanest form of energy because harnessing from the sun does not produce air and water pollution. The manufacturing and disposal of solar panels, though, does produce some waste products, and we'll talk about that next. James and I had talked about the original energy jobs were gathering wood for heating and cooling, and then came dirty coal. Now it is renewable. The left is the chart of the growth of the electricity industry in 21. And because of the rate of growth of solar, we have over 300,000 jobs in the country, which is more than 3 times as much as wind. But between the yellow and the green, look at how big of a pie that is now. And it's very exciting. And many of us know that renewable energy today can cost less than conventional fossil fuel in different parts of the country. And on the right is the global view of the world energy source. In the US, we know that the coal part of the chart is rapidly reducing where the renewable part of that blue segment is growing. Let's see. Then this is the slide we begin to talk about climate justice. Fossil fuel plants are often built next to disadvantaged communities, and the closing of coal mines likely would leave dirty sites close to low-income households. Renewable energy production is inherently cleaner. But we do want to be mindful, though, of the materials and circular economy. So the success of the photovoltaic story will depend on what we can create as an end-to-end production with very little waste left over. So what is in a solar panel? There's a lot of silicon, which is in the center here. Yes, glass is 70% silica. And the harvesting of sand in many communities have been unprecedented now because of the demands of solar panel as well as the electronic industry. And let's take a look what else are made in solar panels. The cobalt and nickel. What else is there? Lithium, phosphorus, manganese, and cadmium. Even though some are in trace amount, mining towns often have environmental fallout in the community, whether it is bad drinking groundwater or air pollution. And other times, they could be in communities of colors, or they could be in native communities, where it could even be on sacred tribal land. Another example is that lithium is often mined in South America, so a lot of those countries could be conflict prone, and cobalt is coming from a lot of the quantities come from Congo in Africa, and the country has very lax child labor law enforcement. So we really want to be mindful of the supply chain, and let's meet the challenge of finding the replacement materials today. So this is just an example that I encourage you to start looking at on the internet. There are many tools to help you look at what is possible in your business and in your house. They just ask you a couple of questions. Go to a Google Map 2, which is what I'm showing here. Once you put in your address, you know your hours of sun exposure and what is your savings in the future if you utilize photovoltaic. So I just punch in 800 Massachusetts Avenue, which is this building. So immediately it gives you, how many hours, what is the saving, and it even gives you an estimate of how much solar you can put on your roof. And I don't know if the tool knows that it is a historic building. It estimated 21.3 kilowatt. And James tells me that actually you have 23.4 of AC for this photovoltaic installation. So I hope that by now you have a bit of a background of how solar is both ancient and historic, but also cutting edge at the same time. These are just a few more examples of how photovoltaic design could be very elegant and multifaceted. The left are those in the US, and on the right, those are global examples. Love to go into each one of them, but that would take another 30 minutes. So why don't I turn it over to James Worden, who can give you a very exciting engineering perspective. So, would you...
Okay. So I guess I hit. Oh, use the right computer. So, going to talk a little bit about how solar works and applying it to useful energy for our homes and businesses. So don't have to read all this, but basically, solar modules made of cells. I'm going to go through that. And then then the modules are used in groups called an array on a roof or on the ground. They can, be on all different types of roofs, angled roofs, flat roofs, commercial buildings, homes, and then ground mount, typically utility scale, also commercial, also carports, whatever. Basically aim it best you can at the sun, and it, works in all different climates. Germany was one of the leaders at the beginning. They paid forward dearly on solar, but they proved that even in a poor, cloudy climate, a little bit like ours, you can, make lots of hay when the sun shines, and they are, a pretty heavy percentage of solar. I think on a Sunday they can be, literally like half the power is coming from solar. They have to curtail the solar because there's too much solar when there's not enough people using power. Obviously with the Ukraine thing and the Russia gas and all that, there's a lot of trouble with heating and all that. So they're doubling down and doing more and more renewables to try to keep, lessening that gap, the problem of energy, which is going to continue. I was just talking to my brother Andrew, who does solar racking, very large utility scale, and he was telling me, third world countries and China, India are growing so fast and such a huge appetite for energy. Fossil fuels are going to be increasing in their use in those places, as well as solar exploding. So it's, it's a crazy world out there. Too many people, too much going on, but we just have to keep paying this forward. And it now is quite cost effective in many parts of the world with no subsidies. Up here, you still need a little bit of a subsidy to get within the cost of money. But it's getting very close, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of that later. And then we have a solar finances is going to be talked about by our pinch-hitting speaker here, Corey from ACE Solar, who can install on homes and I believe businesses too. So I'm going to just jump. I don't do well with words, so we're going to just jump right into the nerdy stuff. So. Solar, 100% of the solar coming in is about 1,000 watts of energy hits a square meter or square yard of area. And in space, before it hits the Earth, it's about 1.3, 1.4, kilowatts per square meter. So about whatever that is, 70% gets through the atmosphere. And then the different things happen. It gets bounced out. The atmosphere bounces some out, then you have clouds and the ground. Some of our exhibits are going to be talking about absorption, reflection, attraction of sun to the Earth to sort of bring it to a real-world perspective for people coming to see the exhibits. And we'll be having, hopefully, educate people on these things. And then, the land and the oceans absorb a certain amount. And then, solar cells have their efficiency when it hits the solar cell. We'll talk about that. But basically, the solar cells, good solar cells are 20 to 23% efficient. So that of that 1,000 watts hitting that square meter, you're getting about 240 watts out of that square meter. Typical panel is about 2 square meters, so you're getting about 450 watts from 2 square meters. And, so if you think of a 4x8 sheet of plywood, which the utility scale modules are now at that level, it's about 650 watts for a 4x8 sheet of plywood. And my brother Andrew just told me the world market price for solar panels is 15 cents a watt. Because of all tariffs and other things here, we pay about 25. You can thank you-know-who for that, but whatever. We do have a 30% tax credit here, so it's kind of like yin for yang, it all washes out. But in the real world, the rest of the world, it's 15 cents. When I was doing solar as a kid, it was Jimmy Carter era, $100 a watt. And then it dropped down to about 10 when I was getting into the solar business, and it just dropped and dropped and dropped. So it literally dropped a couple of orders of magnitude in less than my lifetime, and that's really exciting. Now it's cheaper per watt than any other component of a solar system. Inverter, racking, obviously labor is now the biggest piece. And 10 years ago, the cells were by far the biggest expense. So things have changed a ton, which is really exciting because that is the engine that makes it all work, is the solar panel. So here it is, what I was saying before. Cells, modules, array, and then it goes on a building. And there's a lot of other parts. You got electronics, wiring, you got to feed, you got to, as my head sales guy at Select Renewables used to say, change the gazinta into the gazada. We've got to change DC into AC. And we had t-shirts, if I unbutton this, we used to have, instead of AC-DC, we had DC-AC, ha ha ha, with a lightning bolt, you know, with the solar struck, you know, whatever. So they were popular t-shirts, so people had to collect the whole series at different trade shows. But I'm going to start with the props. So got this iPad here. So we're going to see if these make it to the back in one piece. But just realized I didn't turn on my microphone. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. So when I was about 10 years old, I was inspired by literally these exact solar cells, and it changed my life forever. It was sort of a hippie conference in very unlike this in Arlington, Mass, and it was in the town hall, and I bought one of these for $10. Now this is probably worth about maybe 30 cents. So I'll pass one of these down, and if the last person could just put it on the shelf, one of the shelves in the library. They're very delicate, but you can see how little material is being used, and that's neat because cheap, you know, to be cost effective, you want to use a minimum material. The modern solar cells today, these are 1970s. That cell you're holding is from 1970. So very, very old, but and those cells are much thicker than today's cells. Today's cells are so fragile, and they're 6 by 6 inches or 6.5, huge pieces, and they're also square. So we'll go into the next step. Things, you know, why is that solar cell round? It's like, I'm like the priest here, the body of Christ. The solar cell's round because it's grown as an ingot, silicon from a seed, and then you slice it up like salami with a diamond saw, and all that gets wasted. Goes out a slurry. But it's pretty neat to think about that. Well, then came along, you know, what are you going to do with a round solar cell? You got to put them all together, and you have all the space between them. And the 1970s Jimmy Carter era solar cells that I have one array of that still works 48 years later in my backyard has white space between all those cells. Well, that's kind of stupid. You want to catch the sun, so you want them to be square. So then people had the new ideas to make the solar cells not only square so you can pack them better, very close together, but also not grow an ingot and slice them like salami, but grow them sideways on either carbon wires or in between two sheets of some kind of material, and the crystals will grow. And the reason these are called polycrystalline, these are even more fragile. But polycrystalline cells, there's many crystals that develop, and so they have this pretty sheen to them. So anyway, and this, I just have one of these. This is an Arco solar cell, and I don't know if you can see from there, but it's extremely absorbent. It has coatings. This is only 80s technology. This is junk today, but it's so matte. It's like, it's not shiny at all. Those other ones I passed were shiny. So they're reflecting a bunch of the sun, like the picture of the Earth they're reflecting. You want to absorb it all. This thing is super flat, like it's a flat look and feel to it. And that's really what you want. You want it to take everything in and then have a chance to then convert that to electricity. So anyway, you have those. They're then connected together, go into a module, and then I'll show a picture of the module. You have to, each one of these cells is only half a volt. Like, what are you going to do with half a volt? Well, you can run a little motor and spin a little butterfly around or spin a little wheel, but what can you do useful with half a volt? So you have to put many of them in series. It's kind of crazy, but you know, there's no such thing, well, there is, but a one-cylinder engine would be kind of silly, but engines, what are those? You know, my grandkids won't know what an engine is, but you put them all in series and you get like 40 volts. And then You put those in series and you get 400 volts, or maybe 1,000 volts, or in a utility scale, 1,500 volts. So serious voltage there, and then you get current, just the current of one cell is the current of all of them. The current just passes through. And then you put lots of those in parallel. If you're doing utility scale, you get megawatts, millions of watts. So that's the basics. That's all it is. It's really neat. I call solar a very democratizable energy source, because you just put more of these little things together, and it's not like you can't build a nuclear power plant. Can you build a steam plant? You're burning, not really, in your backyard. You can put one of these in your house. You can put 100. You can run a town on them. It doesn't matter. You can run a country. You just put more of them. It's very unlike other energy sources where there's a scale that needs to be beholden to tons of money, tons of time, to make it happen. So, this can be owned, leased, whatever, by anyone. And it's kind of an exciting fact about solar. So a little bit about the construction. This cell is delicate, and it's made of metals and whatever it can corrode, so you have to protect it. It's got to be out in the weather literally for 50 years. Typically, they say I have 48-year-old modules still working perfectly. One got shattered by a farmer. It caught some of the rigs, the haying machine that makes the bales, clipped one, and it just shattered. But, oh well, I lost 1 out of 24. I had 1 spare, so that's back there, and he stays away now. I mow a little further out for the farmer. But, we need our Richardson's ice cream, so I'm not going to complain. So there's tempered glass is the main structure of today's solar panels. Is tempered glass sheet, very, very strong, can take a 1-inch hailstone 100 miles an hour. With climate change madness building up, there's more crazy hailstorms, and there was a big one that just happened. I don't remember what state, somewhere in the south, Texas or Florida. Big one happened, and a whole bunch of solar arrays got some trouble. So there's reason for the specs. They might have to keep upping the specs to make the solar panels better to keep up with climate change, which is like, oh my God, like we're supposed to be helping to prevent it, but we got to keep moving here. So that tempered glass, then there's a lamination, basically film above the cells and usually below it that melts in a vacuum oven that seals and pushes the vacuum material, pushes everything onto the glass. Basically, you have a sheet of glass with all the stuff on it. So I'm going to go more props, just a bit of more history. We are a historical society, so again, I can't help to say it, Jimmy Carter era. This is the state of the art, 1974. Those other cells are maybe 77. So these are 2-inch cells, probably 1/4 of a watt apiece. These ones are like 1/10 of a watt. So I'll just pass one down each side. So they're kind of fun. And these cells still work in the matrix. Not that matrix. In the system. Well, maybe that one too. But they can last, not forever, but they're going to last, many decades. And someone even made a double glass module. It turned out not to work that well, but glass on both sides, because I thought that would be now impervious to everything, birds, whatever damage from the back. But it was very heavy. Now there's no cost for that. The glass has gotten, amazingly thin, 2 millimeters. That's like, what is that? Not even 1/8 of an inch. I mean, less than 1/8 of an inch. Like 3/32 of an inch, because of cost. But the tempered nature makes it very strong. You put all this together. You put a very small aluminum frame around it. The aluminum from the Jimmy Carter era ones I have are a huge aluminum frame, because it was so important to protect everything about that very expensive solar panel. Now the aluminum around it is like a twisty little tiny thin frame that just barely protects it. But guys on sites will break them sometimes. It's just $80. Who cares? It's crazy. I never would have thought that way, but it's just part of how it's gone. The aluminum has a big environmental impact. To make aluminum, it takes a lot of energy, so you want to use very little aluminum. And there are panels that don't use any aluminum. They just do glass on glass. Roofs are just be made of tempered glass now with solar panels, but that's never been mastered. I'm sure Corey would have something to say about that. It's like always an idea, but it's never been mastered. So that's again, it's packaging it up to make it last. That's all. It doesn't make it handleable. You got to make it, last and last because it can do its job. The cell itself doesn't really wear out. It's a solid state device, truly solid state. It's not like a battery. It's a semiconductor. It can last pretty much forever. Not forever, but very, very long time. So there's the basic idea. You got your solar array on the roof going into an inverter. Remember, it goes into Gazada. Now you have AC. You can put the AC into your house to run all your loads, and then any excess goes out the grid, turns your meter backwards. That's how it works. In 17 states, net metering says that give a penny, take a penny. If you put a kilowatt hour into the grid and you take it back out at night, you pay exactly zero. If you put in too many and use less, they won't give you money, but they'll keep your account negative, so you can use that later, and that's really exciting. Corey will probably talk about more about the economics itself, but you don't want to be putting lots of power in the utility more than you're using, because you want to zero out your bill. There are ways you can probably get paid, but that's a different story for another time. If you size the system right, we went a little overboard here, but the cafe's chewing up a lot of power. Those muffins and whatever, they're very hungry for power. And as Joyce will say, restaurant industries are very tough on power because they also exhaust all your building energy, your conditioned air, because you have to get the fumes and the food smells out. So you have to, so now if that air goes out, well, what air comes in? Outside air, which might be too hot or too cold, so then you have to heat or cool that. Well, we do have an energy recovery ventilator. We plan that carefully, not just because of the cafe idea, but just in general, because we have to change air by codes for a commercial building. We have to change air at so many cubic feet per minute of the whole building. Rated for 100 people have to be in here 124/7. We have to change that air out if the building's open. So we already have that device. We planned that, which is really important for the food thing because they're throwing out our expensive air. But that's as simple as the system is. There are no batteries. Now, when the power goes out, a grid-tied system doesn't work. So then you can add batteries, and then you have battery backup. If you have an electric vehicle, and actually Chris back there does this for real at his home. There's Chris, energy dreamer back there and practitioner. His electric vehicle, he can run his house with it. And every electric vehicle is a giant rolling battery, so of course you could do that. But companies like Tesla, like the Apple of, Apple of the world type of thing, they don't want you to do that because they want to sell you a battery for your house. So I'm going to just rag on that because it's just stupid. Like, you have this giant rolling battery that you just drove home, you don't need it anymore because you're home. It should be connected with your house. So Chris, you can talk to Chris all about that. He knows way more about it than me, and we will all have that in the future. I can guarantee it. It's the way it's going to go. Chris is blazing that trail right here in town. So this is kind of fun. So this is something that Mr. David, our educator, is trying to figure. Well, he has mastered it, but we are going to not only in the display, but for presentations in the theater to children, as well as adults, explain how the PN junction works. I'm not going to go into actually, he does it much better. If you guys have questions, he can take 2 minutes and enlighten you, but he goes through the whole periodic table, and it's quite interesting. But it's really neat how this works. Basically, in very rough terms, I'm not going to say it the whole way, but the sun, the photons hitting the solar cell together with this very strange set of semiconductor parts makes electricity move. The photons basically make, I don't know, I can't say this. It makes electron holes, and the electrons start moving, and then you have an external circuit. Electrons have to come and go, and they go around in a circle. Yes, I went to MIT, but that's as good as I can do. But it's David does it great, and it's nice to hear him say it. It's down there. Then I asked him, where did you learn about this? He said, I researched it over the last few weeks. I'm like, really? But he could teach at MIT. So, but it's so neat how solid state it is. It just, you put those cells that I pass out in the light and you get electricity. It's that simple. It's so neat. That just hit me as a 10-year-old, and it just blew my mind. I took that solar cell home, and I just was so excited about it, and it made my life, what it became. So here's a little bit different type of diagram without the house, a little cleaner. So you got the sun, the solar cell, you got an inverter that makes the AC. You can have a battery to store energy and give it and take it, or the grid, or both. You know, if the grid goes away, you can use the battery, or as Chris does his car. And there's the load, your house panel. Your house panel is really the center of everything. This is just an appliance. It's like appliance that puts energy in, whereas all the other appliances suck energy out. And you know, Chris's car would basically replace the battery. It would go from the circuit panel, not here, it would go from the circuit panel to the car, and basically it is a big rolling battery with an iPad connected to it. It's a big computer as well, so it can talk and do all the right things that it needs to. So just a little bit about the Stevens Center. Very exciting. We, you know, basically made it a giant solar generator without making it look like a giant solar generator. We worked really hard to hide the solar as best we could, and but yet power the building. Now around the back there's a big array, that's most of it, it's 2/3 of it, but it kind of faces the side. But these little strips are also an important piece of it. They're about 2/5 of the total and 3/5 on the back. So this is the installer crew working on it, and they use that machine to get up over the dormers and put that on the roof. There it is, not only our electrician, but our caretaker at Parson Barnard, who just started with us. That's Jerry, if anyone's wondering. Jerry Irwin, know him really well, great buddy of mine. And he's talking to the National Grid official to get us connected. It took us 3 months to get it connected. It's always like this. There's a law for residential that it must be within a month, but commercial, they just, yeah, Corey's laughing. Like, it's like Pingree School was like a year before they got connected. That energy was just robbed. I mean, they paid the money for the system, and a whole year there's no meter in there. But that's another story, another whole presentation. So there's one of Jerry's electricians getting the meter set up. That counts the in and out from the utility. It has to be outside the building with the safety disconnect so the firemen can shut it off if there's a fire. So the Stevens Center with the solar also makes all its heat and cooling. Now this talk isn't about that. That's another talk. We'll do that another night. Actually, we had a network geothermal. We have an exhibit that goes through a little bit of all touches on all this and how net zero brings everything together. But this is how, you know, we can all eat a lot of beans, but really hard to run a natural gas furnace yourself. You have to get that pipe and blow up a few towns, and you have to suck it in and you have to burn it. You can burn wood, you can burn oil, burn coal, but to burn solar, you need either air source heat pump or geothermal. And geothermal is no different than air source, except it's twice as efficient. So it's more expensive, it's a long-term play. The payback is like 10 years instead of 3 years for an air source heat pump, but then you mint it on the back end. You're just using half the energy. But it's tough because you got to get that money from somewhere. We raised the money. We have some amazing donors. The Stevens family, of course, and a bunch of other donors came together to make this all happen. But this lets us work from solar to make all of our heat and cooling. So there's no gas or oil in this building at all. The pipe was cut off of the street, and that's exciting. And this is just a little bit of, the summer, the winter. There's our pipes going out 4 feet under the parking lot, then they go down. It's all in our back parking lot. All our infrastructure is under the parking lot. It'll never be seen. It'll last 100 years. I don't know, maybe more. It's just thick-walled plastic pipe going down 500 feet. There's 6 wells in there, but it's pretty exciting. So, yes, there's Kathy. So the other neat thing is to bring this to the people, to adults, to children of all ages. And here is Peter Boynton and Bob Allegretto finishing touches on the net zero energy model. We all went completely nuts on this. Paul DeSalvo's in attendance too. Paul DeSalvo Priorcraft, they made the model itself, and then these are 3D printed windows, doors, dormers. If you get a chance to look at it in the energy wing, it's not done yet, but it's really exciting. Lot of effort went into that, but it's an interactive display that is teaching about net zero, and solar is one of the big pieces of it. So it's still in process, but it's almost done. So education of this in all different ways for different types of learning is what we're all about. So that's it.
So we wanted you to get excited about solar and then help you think about how it would benefit you financially. Our third speaker, Bryan, had a family emergency. We just found out at 6 o'clock. And very grateful to Casey Bolduck, who can come in his place and talk to us about this from a solar. Please.
Oh, yeah, no problem. Hi, everyone. Let me get my bearings here. I just read the presentation a few moments ago, but all just the same. We'll go over a few things about finance. I gotta say, I know I'm stepping in, but I loved hearing a lot of the stuff that Joyce and James were talking about. I mean, grew up in the Merrimack Valley, so looking at some of the like the tribal references used, our logo is actually using sort of Aztec-style roof, which, without the solar panels itself, was designed to take in the heat a little bit more, right? So great to hear that, and more and more. Again, more is the message. I think James said it well. There's a lot that goes into the technology, but it's having lovely educational events like this to sort of spread the word about the different financial opportunities, which historically had been sort of limited, now have expanded a lot in the last few years. I think Joyce highlighted with some of the tribal regions some additional tax credit opportunities, and there's so many more that we could dive into. But right, again, takes more education, so kudos to the Historical Society for putting on events like this. As a starting point, really the standard is the federal tax credit, the ITC, which is 30% and will be for a good chunk of time now. For the last maybe 5 to 10 years, we had been worrying about whether or not it was going to continue from 1 month to the next in some cases. It had been slated to go down to 20% and then down to 10% and even lower, but luckily we'll have that for some time. So what that means is 30% of essentially the total bill to go solar, so the entirety of the project would be eligible for a tax credit for your taxes for the next year. That's, of course, assuming you have the tax liability and ways of sort of putting that to use. There's caveats for rolling it forward as well, which we'll get into. Let's see. So yes, $1 for dollar. See, I'm going to talk ahead of myself a lot in this presentation. I got to tell you, Joyce, but dollar for dollar reduction of your federal tax bill. So right, 30% of that total cost of the project to go solar. It's not large enough for the entire credit. Some of that can be rolled forward. Of course, if you don't have the tax liability, different story. But luckily, with kind of the evolution of those incentives, there are more opportunities for nonprofits and other organizations to take advantage. Can only be claimed if it's owned. So I say we at Ace Solar, kind of primarily operated on the ownership model, encouraging homeowners to make that investment for themselves. That way, they are taking advantage of all of the tax credits and incentives that go into that. With the lease or PPA, which is a power purchase agreement, the owner of the system essentially is claiming all of those incentives. Plus the increased value to your home, but goes a long way, right? Mass solar credit, a little bit different. I mean, it's a maximum of 1,000, so a lot of the times when we're talking about it, it's that maximum of 1,000, which is pretty easy to hit with a standard solar project, but 15% of the cost of the system. Again, the tax liability is a big part of that, but calculated net cost, that's minus the 30% tax credit. But again, even after that, I think you'd have a hard time not hitting that cap. And again, only by ownership. Tax exemption, so yes, for residential, the homeowner is not subject to sales tax for the purchase or the waived property tax on like the increased value. I think some of the estimates we've seen recently, like Zillow had a couple reports, was 4.5% to 5%, I think was the general increase. I always look at it as in a logical sense of, let's say the younger generation, if you're buying a house without an electric bill, that's a pretty good, incentive to come along with it. But who's eligible? Again, tax liability is the biggest piece of that, but who's making the purchase? The homeowner anyways. Similar for businesses as well, so we can go into the nuances of that, but and that's a new system. So that's when you talk about the history of solar, not back in the hippie days quite as James has referenced, which a couple of my colleagues started in those hippie days, so I make sure to nudge them a little bit about that. But part of that is getting to the end of the life of systems and having the conversation about sort of reinstalling or what happens then. So what this is referring to is a new system or a new installation. The sort of nuances of that as to how much constitutes a new system, racking, whether or not included, we can get into that. But what is covered in the cost, so what's covered in the tax credit, I should say, is all the components. I always say like the entire bill to go solar, essentially. So that's the cost of all the equipment, the labor costs, any additional wiring, let's see, energy storage systems, so batteries, and then sales tax, if that is the case. It says what's not covered. I'm going to do what I always do and say that, while we're not tax accountants, and I would never claim to be, having talked about it quite a bit, the definition of what's covered and what's not, I think is maybe not set in stone. I know listed here like tree removal or trimming, and like roofing materials and things like that. I mean, candidly, I might make an argument that if you need to replace your roof, that is a barrier to going solar, then an argument could be made. But again, I'm not a tax accountant. You should talk to your own folks about that one. However, like maintenance, repairs, cleaning, things like that, or interest owed on financing, not part of that. There are a couple examples here. I think, again, going back to my, I'm not a tax accountant, nor would I claim to be. We could certainly around 30% of the cost of a project, right? So, if it was $15,000 project and you earned, $6,000, tax liability would drop $9,000. Let's see. Here, just discussing the rollover. So if there was a remainder of what you couldn't claim in one year, the idea is that could be used in the year after that. And then, what's the third vehicle? Electric vehicles. So an important, I guess, caveat, right? So this is talking about the installation of the solar system. EV chargers, the cost of appliances, insulation, things of that nature, separate from this, so not part of that tax credit, right? In this example here, just talking about splitting up the two costs there. Skip over that. How can we claim that? So determining eligibility obviously is important. That's 3 times in a row. I hit the trifecta, so referring to your CPA or tax accountant would be the first step, I'd say. There's a specific form that's related to that. Basically just looking for the total cost of the system. I would imagine that your accountant would say that an invoice would be nice to accompany that as well. There's some additional forms relative to like the income, if there's any incentives or things like that. I will plug Energy Sage because I'll say, as someone in the industry, when I got my start, I like to use logic. So when I came into the industry, it was, if there's a way to make energy off the sun, which is not going away anytime soon, then yes, sign me up, right? Beyond that, Energy Sage was critical in my own self-education. Very good at an unbiased take on not only the technology, but the incentives. And we've worked again with them over the years in bringing homeowners that technology for themselves. So definitely reach out to them if you have any information. I know solar was sort of the core of what they've done before, but heat pumps is part of their platform now as well. So, and I think that's it there, right? Thank you.
Our speakers would please join us up front. Make sure that your mics are on so that you can be heard when you're answering questions.
Sorry.
And now for everybody who can see and hear me over the Zoom presentation, now is the time where, if you have questions for our speakers, to please ask them over Zoom, and I will relay them to our speakers. But as of right now, here in the audience, does anyone have a question for our speakers? I will repeat the question into this microphone so that the people online can hear us. Do we have any? Yes, sir.
Everybody stand up.
Or whatever you're comfortable with doing.
So we just bought a house actually around the corner of Court Street in November, and we're trying to find out, as far as the trees in the back. We have a lot of sun on our side of the house, but we're waiting now, obviously, for the spring for all the leaves to come in, and we're not sure how much it's going to cut down on that sun. right now it'd be perfect. So, how do we factor that already? Before, we were getting phone calls, get phone calls from Tulsa, which is one of the big companies, okay, but every 2 weeks. They say, I gotta wait till the leaves come in. So is that all I'm supposed to do? Can I have someone look at the house now before everything blooms? I mean, how does that work?
All right, so real quick, sorry. The question was, can this homeowner get someone to look at the house and evaluate it in regards to foliage covering? Now that here we are in early spring, there's not much foliage, but after the fact, can we get someone to look at that?
That was a great question. I was just so eager to jump on it. No, you don't necessarily have to wait. Obviously, I kind of do that myself, leaf peeping, as we do, right, in the Northeast. But no, company, as part of our sort of assessment in putting together an estimate for you, we use technology, satellite imagery, to assess sun access. Joyce, I believe, had the Project Sunroof from Google used there as a sort of preliminary tool. Actually, it's available right on our website. Marketing guy, pat myself on the back. Which you can plug your address into, and it'll show you like how much sun access is as a rule. TSRF or sun access are the two sort of factors that they're looking into, and that kind of comes out with an average 70 or above is generally what lenders are looking for as far as like a loan approval or like something along those lines. So yeah, no, you don't necessarily have to wait. Again, I mean, the tool is not readily available for the public. If you reach out to us or another solar company, usually they can provide you with a shading report as part of that. Yeah.
So do you have that information outside?
Yeah, absolutely, happy to.
Okay.
mysolar.com for anyone listening. But,
mysolar.com.
So one question, I've been talking to Tulsa now, I mean, they seem to be a good one. Would you recommend them other than maybe your company versus other companies?
I will always recommend my company. I was trying to remain unbiased. I mean, I thought I did a good job on the first response of keeping it to, but that wasn't too bad, right?
No.
No, heavily. So obviously I'm going to promote us, A-Solar, a great, I mean, local companies is always how I've looked at it. We've prided ourselves on being like local, a local company and being just that. Tesla, some of the other players are national companies with local kind of representatives anyways, right? There are other local companies that, I mean, just like any home improvement project, I'd recommend getting a couple quotes for comparison, right? But no, I mean, we sort of built this, the partner owners grew up right here, and actually their father was mayor in Lawrence and all of that. So yeah, talk to the local guys, I would say, us or otherwise. Thank you for that question.
And you're in a great town because you have a lot of good peers and neighbors who are very knowledgeable too.
Yeah, we're here, we moved in, so we're adding to this.
That's right.
Any more questions in the audience?
Yeah, along the lines of what you said, not that, I mean, I'm in the process of selling my house, but even if people buy it, would be interested, but the point is, don't think you need to know like how much usage is going to be, so if he's on then this is November, there's not enough of a history of how much electricity gets used all the time. I mean, I remember I did look into it at one point a bunch of years ago, and I was told that I didn't have enough usage. So I had one self living in the house by myself. I didn't have enough electricity, kilowatt hours to warrant having the trans.
Did you want to repeat?
I'll take, yeah.
What?
Someone wasn't, oh, I'm sorry.
Do we have to say the question?
Please. Well, I can take care
thought
of it,
you
or
were
you
looking at
can as well. But the question was, what is the solution to someone who does not use enough electricity, might be living alone, does not use enough electricity to warrant installing solar
Well, it
panels?
was that or the history, right? Like having enough history to show, like to be able to make the calculation. At the core of the question, I think what I heard was too, like how do you sort of figure out what you need, right? And we'll look at it on an annual basis, right? So, jumping into some of the science is fun because like how many watts per second per day, like,
Yeah.
as James said, he was with words, I am with numbers, so that is wildly impressive. But however, we'll look at it, and if you have an electric bill, we'll look at the course of a year and see what you used and kind of make an annual total on that, building in maybe a 10-15% buffer, for increased usage, something along those lines, right? If you don't have the usage or new construction, things along those lines, I'd say if you're buying a new home, typically they'll, like, as part of that, they might share historical energy usage as part of the electric bill, so you might have that. If not, I mean, it's as much research as you want to do, really, right? You can dive into, if you have a month, you can sort of extrapolate that based on the factors. So if you're using a winter month as a comparison and it has electric heat and some other things, and then you're switching to you want to make an estimation on the winter, you take away that electric heat, right? So there's calculations that can be made with a lot of variables, but no, it's certainly not impossible to sort of make a calculation.
And I'll add to that. There's no such thing as too small or too big.
That's true.
The only problem with too big would be if you don't have enough roof because you gobble up too much power and have a pool and a jacuzzi and whatever. But if there's no house too small, that, as I said about democratization, it starts at a single cell, a module. Well, you can't do a single cell, but a module, 2 modules, 5 modules. So, a house that's only has a $100 electric bill only needs a 3 kilowatt solar array. That's a tiny one. Yeah. But, is that a gas heated house? It's going to move to heat pumps.
Right.
You can get an electric vehicle, it's going to go right up. Now you need 7, 8 kilowatt system. So, like someone who said it's too small to deal with, it's just because they're not going to make enough money putting it on. So Ace Solar would never say that, Revision Solar would never, like Tesla would say that, or Solar City, because it's like they don't want to deal with you because they're only going to make, $3,000 or something. So that's a very funny thing if someone said that. So.
And I do have a computer here. If you like, after the event, we can just get on that interactive tool, and really within a split second, you get an estimate. And you saw that between James' 23.4 and the 21 kilowatt, for that split second, it's not too bad.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, yes.
So what happens when the electric grid is out, which happens a lot? James, you said that Chris knows something about batteries, backlash, and how would that play in, or do you want bigger storage?
Yes.
So what happens when the power goes out, which happens an awful lot here in North Andover, and what about storage is the question?
So a couple things, good question. So the first part, yes, generally speaking, if you have just a solar array, if the power goes out, the power goes out. Your connection to the grid and things, right? At its core, the base sort of practice of it is energy is coming in and it's flowing out to the grid, and you're drawing from the grid, and then it's a math calculation as far as like how much you've used versus how much you've pushed out, right? The other equation added into that now recently is batteries, right? Relatively new, right? You're talking about the sort of arc and plateau and the dropping of prices of solar panels over that period of time. Well, we're right in that first beginning of the batteries, right? And capacity as well, right? So right now, generally speaking, using a Tesla Powerwall or something on the average battery would take a few of those to create like a whole home backup scenario, which can be if they're $20,000-ish, per unit, looking at a couple of those. So, right, there are now, part of the evolution of the technology, Enphase is one inverter company that has a sort of, their microinverters will allow for generation and energy to move and be used in the home on a sub-panel while the power's out as the sun's up during the day. Once the sun goes down, then it's a little bit different of a story, but add batteries into the equation for small things, a small sub-panel, for emergency purposes, to get you through the night or something along those lines. That is basically where the technology is now, I'd say.
So I can add to that. So a microinverter is a little inverter that makes the Gazinta from the Gazata from one module. So one module has its own mini inverter, and then you get AC out of it, and that's really democratized because you do one by one by one.
Correct.
Each one is its own complete system that makes a grid-tied power.
Yeah.
With this system we have here, probably one of the last systems in this decade where it's there's still a war going on, but this is more of a string inverter where we bring many modules that are in series, and then we run that to an inverter that's downstairs, that's in the elevator lobby on the first floor that you can see, and it'll be part of an exhibit soon too. But there's something to see, at least with a microinverter system. It's all up on the roof. There's nothing to see on the ground, which is kind of nice because there's nothing else to the system. But to add also to that, again, to remind that Chris is back there, like that $20,000 Powerwall ain't nothing like an electric vehicle.
Right.
An electric vehicle is a huge battery. Right. So you come home, when you're away, you don't really need to have your house doing much unless you have a fridge full of meat or something. But you know, when you're home, your car's there, and then you have your battery, and you can go in and out of the battery. When the sun's out, the car's charging, the house is running, and at night you're sucking out of the car. The cars have big batteries, you can still get to work and back, whatever. So there's a lot of ways to that. But again, that's still a little bit future. We talked about the cusp of batteries. Well, then there's this whole changing of all cars and all that, and trucks and whatever, and when that's going to be, you know, mainstay as opposed to Chris Day up in, what is it, not French Farm. What road is it, Chris? Barker, up by the farm. So, you know, that is the future. I do a lot of weird things at my house too, but you know, the Tesla Powerwall is the state of the present. Like you can get that, put it in your house, pay another bunch of money, and now you have a battery that basically sits there doing absolutely nothing all year until you have those 2-3 little power outages for a day or two.
Right.
So it's kind of a waste of money. And those chemicals that Joyce talked about, the periodic table of elements and the cobalt and the child labor, whatever, like we don't need to be using batteries and sticking them on a wall for all year to use it 2 days a week. So there's a lot to be figured out here, but this is a capitalist system and world, and people can sell you something, they're going to sell you something. I'm not going to buy a battery and put it on the wall. I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to wait till Chris says it's ready, and I'm going to get the right thing and do that.
Right. Oh no, that's fair, and I think that's exactly what is your point. Right? It's making that assessment for yourself in the moment, right? Obviously, we like to look into the future as far as we possibly can, right?
But you need to do things for
But
now.
you need to do things, right?
Yeah.
If you need that energy backup this soon, right? Like right now, you know, comparing a home generator where, and again, it's about the mix, right? The bigger picture than just the electricity piece of this or the energy, right? So if you know, having a gas generator for emergency purposes that you're only using a handful of times a year, right? That's not as big of an impact in the grand scheme of things as having the power wall on your wall, right?
And I am an optimist. Kathy and Joanna and I had lunch with a former U.S. Department of Energy employee, and there is so much research going on because of the interest and the market demand. I personally believe that this whole pricing and size of these equipment is going to be just like our cell phone. It is just going to drop very quickly, and we will all have access to it.
We did go from 200 pounds to about 180 pounds, so it's a step in the right direction. I think the latest model I saw, so you know, we're getting there.
Like this thing's going to drop like that.
But I still yell at my neighbor Brad, who got the $10,000 natural gas generator when he has a 20 kilowatt array. Because he said, yeah, they wanted $20,000 for the Powerball, and the generator was $10,000. It's like, but Brad, you have a solar array there. Brad's not here, so I could make fun of him. And he could then run his whole estate off of that solar array when the power's out for 7 days straight. But anyway, it's you know, he talked to his solar guy, and the solar guy, you know, whatever. So it's, you know, this stuff is still in development, but you got to take what you can get now, figure out what you need. If it were me, I would hold them batteries. Like, you know, go talk to Chris about how to do it his way, and or just wait.
I like the truck idea.
I saw.
But I'm confused. You sound like solar works at night.
It does.
At night, you buy it from the grid. Right?
Yes.
And that's generated with fossil fuels somewhere, right?
Well,
Natural gas, wind, nuclear, a little bit of oil, a little bit of coal.
Yeah, but I mean, probably locally, it all comes from a power plant.
Yeah, natural gas and wind.
Right, so we haven't solved a complete problem.
well, I think that's one piece of where batteries are having some use. So out west, where in some other states where there's time of use rates, so right middle of the day it costs a little bit more, right? So what they're doing is they're saving up that energy and then using the battery energy during those high price times, right? So similar concept with like the end of a day approach, right? So you're charging up the battery during the day, and then in those evening hours as the sun goes down, you're sort of using what's in the battery, and then, you know, never siphoning yourself off from the grid, right? That's always going to be there just in case, but using that until, you know, you have to go to the grid.
You know, as
Or
you
extending the
mentioned
use, I should
in
say.
your presentation, James, one of the problems about solar is too much solar.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, what are you doing is generating more than people are using.
And put it in a
Right.
battery is not a bad idea, yeah.
Yeah, so then saving it, or, you know, like having people charge their cars during the day, not at night.
Right.
You know, which is sort of non-intuitive.
They tell people we should charge at night because the utility is not being used, but that's when all the solar's available. So it's like I do my laundry in the middle of the day because the sun's out. If I do it at night, I'm burning gas somewhere. So, and there's something else about doing laundry. Let's talk laundry for a minute. Efficiency. If you do your laundry when it's 60 degrees outside in the day when the sun's out instead of 30 degrees at night. When the dryer runs, it's not sucking all that cold air in your house. So it's very interesting. No one would think about that, but in my nerdy world, that's what we do.
That's an interesting one. I like, I like your creative solutions to everything. So maybe like some kind of like passive battery where if you have two large, gallons or large masses of water in your backyard, just pump one into this, and then let gravity do its thing, so it kind of passes back and forth. So you can save the energy somewhere.
Yeah, I think Joyce is probably right. I think there's a lot of research going on about
For sure.
how to solve
for sure.
this particular part of it.
Smaller, better, faster.
It'll
stronger,
become
more
cheap.
efficient.
Yeah.
And don't forget the Paris Agreement. Countries have really latched on to the 2050 net zero. So on the policy and the utility side, I mean, they are building utility solar like crazy too.
Yeah.
So the grid is going to get cleaner, which is a very good thing. So between what we're doing individually and what the utility is supplying, we can get there. The question is how many of us are doing it.
I guess one question that I would have, sort of at your level, Joyce, is what happened to nuclear in this mix? Why did that just get sort of set aside when that could be a non-polluting source, certainly in some day-to-day basis, right? That would provide the nighttime power, if you will. You know, what happened to that? How did that just get kind of pushed off the agenda?
That's a good
She's
question.
taking that one.
I mean,
My only
Get my
contribution.
nuclear engineering degree from that one.
you know, if we're so smart to come up with all these other solutions, why can't we figure out the nuclear problem and make that our other source of energy when we need it, right? The peaking source, right? We don't need it all the time. What's the problem? Why
So
has that become
Well,
such an anatomy?
it can't be a peak load solution. You don't turn a nuclear plant on and run it.
Yeah, it has to run.
It's not a peak load.
Yeah, but if you know that you're gonna need it at night, you turn it on so it runs at night.
But I think it can't even do that. Nuclear plants.
If they're like, electric heaters.
No, but I mean, again.
I mean, point made anyways, right? That there's my only contribution was going to be a pop culture reference, but I think I have something now. So, no, I think in that case, right, there's cleaner, more efficient ways of using the technology, right, on its level. I mean, I grew up going to Salisbury and Hampton and seeing Seabrook on a regular basis as I took the chartered boat out to go fishing, right? So I understand how much of a role it's played. I think to Joyce's point about the research going into solar, I think more research needs to be done to find that way to make it more efficient, more easier to maintain. I think would be a big thing, right? But yeah, I mean,
And the
point
general
taken, for sure.
public learning from what they have seen in Japan, I think there was still a lot of
Yeah.
caution.
Everything was pop culture that was coming to
Yeah,
mind. So that's
I'll
exactly
say,
Every time there's a 3 Mile Island or a Fukushima, then everybody goes like.
or Chernobyl, or
right.
They are, nuclear plants are somewhat safer these days. I hate to say it, but China's building several hundred nuclear power plants right now because they just need so much energy. They're also building more solar than anyone. People can poo-poo China, whatever, but they're building and manufacturing, building more solar, like massive scales that you couldn't ever, gigawatts of solar. But to say a couple of other things, not praising everything Elon Musk, but he is great at thinking first principles. So you know that little square of Texas that sticks up above the whole big state, well, if you take 1/9 of that square, of that little square of Texas, and you cover that with solar, spread over the country with that will provide all the electricity day and night that the United States runs on. Then you just need batteries to store it, which is also not really a big problem. Again, back to Chris. If everyone's vehicle is electric, you have your nighttime battery there. And yes, your commute, your 20, 40, 50-mile commute doesn't need that 300, 200-mile battery. So your house can use the 10, 12 kilowatt hours at night. You take a little out of the battery, you wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, zoom off in your car, you come home. Your car can be your nighttime energy. The car can charge in the day when you're at work. There's many ways to cut this. Who knows how it will all get figured out, but it's fun to be working in the field. I'm working on solar boats and going to tackle something too hard, like how do you push something through water? On solar power, I don't know. We're trying to figure it out. We just rented from Sal. We kissed the ring again. We're leasing from him. We're trying to figure it all out. So, it's the whole net zero energy system. You can't buy them. I'm not shilling anything here, but
That was going to be my next question.
yeah, it's like, how do we do all this? And I'm going off like bleeding edge forward because I want to challenge myself to death and do the next thing. But we need to get all of this figured out, vehicles, heating, building power, how it all works together, nighttime power, as Stan said. But nuclear power is not the answer. Nuclear is not going to come back in this country. It's just the not in my backyard thing. It's not only climate justice or location justice, whatever. That would be very tough sell. China, dictatorship, boom. There are hundreds of nuclear power plants going on. I mean hundreds. I can't even imagine that. Seeing what a nuclear power plant is and how much cement gets poured to make it and how to make it safe. And are all several hundred of those going to be reliable? In China, I don't know. I'll ride a bullet train. I don't know and a TGV. I don't know if I'm going to ride the Chinese high-speed train yet. But their electric vehicles are coming here, so we better watch out. Tesla has to watch out. They're ahead. They beat Tesla now, so.
No, it's true. To the bigger point, right? Education and events like this, like talking about it more, having it becoming more of a regular conversation, normalizing the conversation. The marketing manager side of me is saying, right, that's exactly what I want to do, right? Is normalize the conversation because, like you said, it's shifting the mix of like, you just described the driving to work equation. It's instead of, paying your home heating bill, you're now, right, charging your car on your way home to make sure that you're, so.
It's crazy. All different.
Crazy world.
I think I saw Mike Lenahan with a question back here.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm way back here.
The way back.
As far as aesthetics, I live in the historic district, and the big thing about solar panels is that they're not they don't meet the requirements for the historic district. So I was wondering, is there product development going on that will allow the solar panels to be put on that are not so obvious and that they fit the roofs that perhaps they're put on rather than just the squares that
So
repeat that.
So the question is for those people who own a historic house and who have very specific restrictions on what they can do with that historic house, is there any production going on for solar panels to mesh better with historic properties or properties with restrictions?
I want to know what James is working on. So, do you have anything up your sleeve that we
No.
new? All right, good.
Not.
All right. So to start, anyways, what I know for now, anyways, right? So there's some things, developments that are coming out. It's the only thing I don't have a counter argument for, if I'm putting on my sales hat, is aesthetics. Right? To each their own. It's your castle. I'm not gonna tell you how it looks. Right? I will say they look a lot better than they have historically. So a lot of black, a lot of kind of sleek-looking modules, black frame on the outside as well. To take it to the next level, on larger scale systems, there's a product called Solar Skins, which is essentially something that's kind of a mesh that sits on top of it. As you might imagine, there's a little bit of losses, but it's very minimal, enough to the point where they have a product for it. So for large scale systems where it's really right, that's the idea. And I'll say from personal experience, we've dealt with a lot of historical commissions and through all over New England. The Outer Cape, for one, Commercial Street in Provincetown, I think there are 4 or 5 properties there that we've had installs on, kind of all in a row, so they were very familiar with our presence at the meetings and things like that. But again, I always go back to education, that's the marketing part of me, but it's about having those conversations and finding kind of that common ground as we're sort of evolving, right? Part of why I love a lot of what we talked about here is that I grew up in the Merrimack Valley and now work right up the street. So being at the East-West Mills and walking across the street and seeing the refurbished building and knowing that they have solar panels up on the roof, right? So that mix of old and new and finding ways to sort of meet in the middle, I think it's more of a conversation. Nothing's ever set in stone, but.
Yeah, so commercial, even mill buildings, whatever, you can put it on the roof, you'll never see it.
Right.
If you have an angled roof, there are various ways. A single glass panel, the one I explained that's made of a piece of glass, is basically the cheapest, most efficient, easiest way to do it. That's where the market's going, millions of pieces made. So that's your bottom dollar. But as Michael points out, how do you make it look nice? As Corey was saying, they are sleeker looking. We have all blacks up here. You can put it kind of close to the roof. You can put a black roof. You can change your roof if you're changing the roof. You can also do ground mount. You could do an external building or a garage, or if you happen to have one. Ground mount lets it be detached from the building, so it can be its own, call it art, call it ugly, whatever, but it's separate from the house. It can be behind, it can be hidden. You can put it anywhere. You have to watch your trees, of course. You have to have enough land. But also there are, Tesla and others do have roof integrated that looks just like shakes and slates and shingles, but they're all way more expensive because they're little pieces and they got to plug together. But they do it. So if you want to pay for it, if you want granite countertops in your kitchen instead of corian, yes, you can pay for it and get it looking amazing. But I wouldn't do that. I'd spend money on other things that are better. But you can do that, and the technology will probably get better over time to make those roof integrated things. I think a roof should just be glass, and it shouldn't stick out, be a separate thing.
That's where my brain
But,
goes too.
yeah,
Right.
And Stephen Strong, he's been in solar for 45 years, as old as those before those Jimmy Carter panels. He really pushed building integrated solar for commercial buildings and modern, really cool looking glass buildings. You can do some neat things. Homes, if you have a historic home and you just call out a clean rectangle, the whole thing, even with the roof at the same level, that could be kind of cool. But again, time will tell.
Yeah.
We'll see where this all can go.
It's all about creative solutions, I think, is a big part of it, right? So, and one thing, maybe this is a plug, since you brought it up, carports, canopies, like those sort of solutions, right? So one comes to mind, company was looking for a unique solution, didn't want something massive, a big metal structure, and the cost of building a new metal structure just to put solar panels on, right, that comes with its own financial limitations, right? Using utility poles and a different type of racking, we're able to minimize that cost, so it's a different sort of setup, right? There's not much readily available on the residential side now, but one of the sort of explorations I've been doing recently is talking to builders in finding ways to sort of come together to create a sort of setup that would accommodate, solar panels, a smaller solar panel setup, right? So you talk about having just a few panels, right? If you have a small electric bill, maybe it's just a small awning or something in the backyard, for shade and things like that, but it's also capturing the sun as well, pergola as well, right? So unique solutions are
I agree
coming.
that the conversation is very important.
Correct.
So I think in my practice, over 10 years ago, we were talking about single pane window versus triple glazed windows with historical commissions.
Yep.
And it was a very difficult line to cross at that time. And I think over time, we really kind of move on. They can accept that because it is so much more energy efficient. We would like to see more historical commissioners coming to events like this.
I love those
they kind of
conversations.
understand
Yeah.
why we're doing what we're doing, and maybe they would look at the roof a little differently, and they would look at aesthetics a little differently.
I'll also point out that we try to, Joanna's operation, we try to be very community. This is not just a historical society, but it's a community center, bringing the community. Well, one thing with solar is if your house just doesn't fit, you have some beautiful oak trees on the south side of your house, whatever, you have a really historic house. You can go to Strawberry Banks or our little Strawberry Banks right here. You're not going to have a solar array on some of the 1,600, 1,700 houses, but you can have central solar somewhere that powers a bunch of houses. I've joked with my neighbors about the Academy Street Railway and the Academy Street solar energy system. Why not?
Yeah.
You put a 50 kilowatt array and you power all the houses on Academy Road. Easy. It's really not that big a deal.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to get to is this whole democratizing thing. Utilities got to wake up here, because the way they're going, the way they do things in some states, and even with National Grid, batteries getting cheap, defection from the grid is going to be a thing. Chris is going to cut off from the grid long before the rest of us, and we can go see how he does
from
it.
New Hampshire, it's a very live free to die attitude, so we're a lot of people I talk
Yeah.
very much in the same boat. So can I get away from the grid? And a lot of the incentives
Yeah.
require that connection to it, but I think the trend, as you said, right, that's the idea. And
The
I
grid
think now
makes so
they're
much sense
Yeah.
because it's connecting everyone together like a web, and you buy and share power. But
what grid?
What
That's
grid?
to
As
keep
more and more people get solar and they're not paying an electric bill, who's paying for the wires? How's it all going to work? No one knows. Utilities haven't figured that out. One by one, click, the switch is being turned off. Well, who's left the last man standing is going to have to pay for all the maintenance on the wires? No. So they're going to have to charge solar people that don't pay a bill just a fee to be on the grid. Well, now you have a really big incentive to get off the grid. So again, utility has a lot of thinking to do, and I wish I could be helping to figure that out, but I'm sailing down the river to do other things. So leave it to someone else.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is 8:40. I'd like to thank our speakers. Our pizza is getting cold outside, so if you have any further questions, you can bend their ear face to face over some pizza. Once again, some applause for our speakers. Thank you very much.
We should do